Throughout the years, many anglers have spent time debating just which river should be deemed the best. The list of deserving candidates is indeed long. However, this is not a story about the best, though many hold firm to that argument. Yet a story of importance, and recognizing that no other river has single-handedly had such a profound impact on trout and fly fishing in America and around the world than Northern California's McCloud River. You see, the rainbow trout from her waters are well-traveled and have populated rivers to all corners of the globe. The McCloud River has given much of herself along the way, with 2/3 of her natural flow diverted, a dam to the north that contributed to the loss of one species, and another to the south that eliminated the migratory passage of steelhead and salmon. Remarkably, her blue ribbon grace and beauty prevailed, and to this day she remains a treasure deserving of our respect and protection. In 1874, Livingston Stone visited the McCloud River, tasked by the U.S. Fish Commission to build a salmon hatchery. Upon returning to the east, wrote the following in his journal: "It is just another peculiarity of the McCloud, and it can hardly be said of any other California river, that it has been abandoned to its aboriginal inhabitants. The Wintu Indians live on its banks and thrive off the bounty of its salmon-rich waters. The miners pick and shovel have upturned banks of other rivers, yet the McCloud represents what is becoming extremely rare, namely a region which is just as it was before the white man found it."
The history of the McCloud starts with the fish. If not for the fish, there would have never been the Wintu. Without the fish, there would have never been all the interest in the McCloud in the 19th century, both from private landowners and from the famous hatchery that was built on the McCloud in the 1870s. The McCloud River had one of the densest populations of Native Americans in the West. It was a salmon culture trapped in the inland part of California. There were basically between 6,000 and 9,000 people living on the McCloud River Canyon, just between the confluence of Squaw Valley Creek and the Old Pitt River. Unlike the majority of streams in California, the McCloud was not a source of gold. The fact that there was no gold found on the McCloud kept it isolated culturally even after the California gold rush. The McCloud remained isolated because there were no roads up it. There was nothing anyone wanted. They couldn't build the stagecoach road up here because it was just too steep of a canyon. They didn't end up building the railroad through here for the same reasons. All there is a trail. Even coming down here, when the minute you tell people you gotta huckle the buck in here with a pack, you got a filter going. What? I'm not visualizing that. There are many accounts by travelers through this region, from John Muir to Joaquin Miller, talking about how the river was literally covered with salmon. You couldn't see the bed of the river because of the salmon. When Livingston Stone arrived in San Francisco, he began to ask, where do I find the salmon? He was about 20 years after the gold rush, and most of the salmon streams that are tributary to the San Joaquin and the Sacramento rivers were shot. Someone he met on a street in San Francisco told him that he knew where the salmon spawned. He'd been up on the lower end of the McCloud River and told Livingston Stone, you should head in that direction. So he takes a stagecoach up to Red Bluff until he gets up past the Pitt River, right at the confluence, and he sees a bunch of Wintu with whole racks of salmon drying in the sun for their food. This was the spot to build his hatchery. The rainbow trout of the McCloud have often been called the rainbows of the world. They've been exported to such places as Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, Scotland, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and the eastern United States. They were backplanted in America. That's kind of wild, you know. They had their endemic trout in the east, but they fouled it up so much that following the Civil War, there were like no fish left back there. All of a sudden they find all these rainbow trout out here in Northern California where they're trying to collect salmon. They were meant to replenish lost Atlantic salmon populations on the East Coast. Salmon smolt and eggs didn't seem to travel so well. They were thinking about shutting this down, and suddenly they realized rainbow trout traveled real well. Let's take all these rainbow trout and see how they do back there. And it was discovered that rainbow trout did really well in a wide variety of water.
The inaccessibility of this wonderful stream, the entire absence of agricultural land on its margins, and of gold on its banks has rendered it the most uninhabitable and unexplored region of the Pacific coast. Little wonder that this rugged, inaccessible country should be the very paradise for the sportsman and the sightseer.
I came over here in November of '83. It's the first time I'd seen the lower McCloud, really. And I dropped in there, and it was epic. Emerald pools, man. You look in the, on a sunny day, you look into the deep pools, and you can see 3 or 4 or 5 feet in there, but you just can't quite see everything. It adds a mystique to it. There was a beta hatch at about 2 in the afternoon. There was like 20 fish in its foam line rising. I mean, I looked in there and I just went, oh, fuck, really? Check this. I go, it's dry fly on, man. This is the greatest river anywhere, ever. Because this is the McCloud, man. You lose yourself here and become part of something that God created. You're here, and you're amongst all of the best of what we have in this country, maybe even in the world. And so, any run you get in, you look around you and there's promise. There's always promise of something great to come.
The McCloud River became known by anglers as a world-class fishing destination. With its overwhelming beauty, spring flows of cold, clean water, and a pristine, rugged countryside, indeed, there is not a more scenic river in California.
The McCloud today is so different than the McCloud of yesterday. With the loss of the bull trout, you no longer have winter run Chinook, spring run Chinook, fall run Chinook, or steelhead. We're all packed into here. You always had a big fish from the ocean cruising around in the McCloud. So in 1945, Shasta Dam went in and cut off anadromous fish access, so salmon and steelhead could no longer make it to the McCloud. This also had an impact on the bull trout. The bull trout fed off the juveniles off the eggs. But the bull trout persisted until 1965 when McCloud Dam went in. And that was sort of the final straw. The last one was seen here on the McCloud River for the Nature Conservancy Preserve in 1976. Yeah, and to add to all this fish diversity on the McCloud, it even gets more remarkable when you get up into the way headwaters above some big waterfalls that were barriers to all these salmon and steelhead and coastal rainbows. You have this unique red band trout that lives in these isolated, small spring creeks up in the upper watershed. They're tiny little creeks. They're pretty small fish, but they're amazingly unique. And they're delicate because they exist in such small little habitats that you have to watch them. It doesn't take much for these little populations to blink out, and once they do, we can't get them back. The McCloud's fed by what's one of the biggest single spring inputs that come into any river in the United States. It's huge, big springs. It's about 600 to 800 CFS of water. Think about 600 to 800 basketballs coming at you every second. I mean, it just pours out of the canyon wall. That cold spring water flows down for about 5-6 miles into McCloud Reservoir. The water is siphoned, no pumping, over to the ridgetop between the McCloud and the pit. And out of this, you're getting power for about 600,000 homes, 6.8 million people. It's an important power supply for California. This changed the whole way the river looks and fishes. I mean, it's what you think about as a classic tailwater fishery. In 2006, when Nestle proposed to build one of the largest water bottling plants in the world, our concern, a lot of the local communities' concerns, were what would be the long-term impacts to the McCloud River. Take spring water from the headwaters of the McCloud, put it into little plastic bottles, and truck it out of here. So the McCloud Dam has its process going on right now, and the other dam that affects the river is Shasta Dam. And the issue there is talk about raising that dam. And we're concerned about raising that dam because it's going to flood another mile of the McCloud River. Most of the McCloud that we fish, where we go now today, is but a fraction of what the historic McCloud was. Aside from being a beautiful fishery, this river has nothing left to give.
The clear rushing McCloud is a stream to delight the heart of any fisherman. Along its banks may be seen the expert with his fly, wielding his delicate tackle in contrast to the Indian, under his tent-like shelter, spear in hand, waiting for the unsuspecting salmon.
I love this river because everything about it is exciting. Of all of the rivers that I've ever fished, it's the most amazing. It's the most beautiful and it's the most enchanting, and I just love to spend time here. This is how you get in touch, right here. It's just like church. And I've heard that said by many people. It's just like church coming to the McCloud. The McCloud River has given so much of itself over the years that it really should be left alone and not expected to give any more.
Between the salmon, the steelhead, and the bull trout, all we have left are the rainbows and small isolated populations of the red band. This river is dammed below and dammed above. It really has nothing else to give. The calls for more water in California will never end. When is enough enough?